Hi, I'm Meredith Vieira, host of The Great American Read. They say to write what you know, and what does anyone know better than the town they grew up in? Great books can give us an intimate look at the hometowns of the authors that we love. Join us as we hear how authors shine a light on their hometowns in some of our favorite books.
So there's Nikki Giovanni in Knoxville. I go back to her all the time. She's the voice of us. You know, what a powerful, powerful voice. And I wish I could hear more from her about what life was like when she's written children's book about living in Knoxville, but what was that like for her in the day? You know, when she comes back, she was recently here for the Friends of Literacy, and she was so positive and upbeat about Knoxville, but man, it can't have been easy to be African American in that day, in that time, in this place.
So in Asheville, Thomas Wolfe is a very famous author, and he wrote a book called Look Homeward, Angel that takes place mostly in Asheville. And it is really an amazing book. It is really a long haul and very engrossing and difficult to read because of the language is incredibly ornate, but it's beautiful in its own way. And so I was really struck by that.
I think it's important to a fiction writer to write about a city they know. I was talking to Rick Yancey, the mystery writer and fantasy young adult writer, but he had to be talked into writing a book set in Knoxville, the highly effective detective series. I think there are about 4 of these books, and because it was the city he knew best. He tried to write a book about New York, and the publisher said, "Why don't you write about a city you know well?" And he ended up writing this fairly complex series of detective stories about Knoxville. And obviously, if you live in Los Angeles like Raymond Chandler or San Francisco like Dashiell Hammett, you write about the places you know best in terms of setting.
So I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. That's where I live. I've lived there for a long time, and it has totally shaped what I write about and how I write, and because I am deeply inspired by that setting, by the Asheville area. Biltmore Estate is where the Serafina series takes place in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. And of course, Will of the Wood takes place in the Great Smoky Mountains in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. And my books are filled with the settings where they take place.
I think it's also important to write about something as you're learning about it. I think if you learned about something a long time ago and you're considered the expert of it, history is likely to be pretty dull. I've read lots of Civil War books written by guys who were authorities on the Civil War 30 or 40 years ago, and they're dull as dirt, because these guys have studied this all their lives, and they don't know anymore what's interesting and unusual about what they're writing about as they maybe once did. But if they're writing about something you've learned in the last year or two, I think that's what makes an active and interesting book, because you're still excited about it and you're conveying that excitement to the reader. When I wrote the Tennessee Theater book, I would say 3/4 of the stuff in there I had no idea about until I got into it. Even Market Square, I thought I knew Market Square pretty well, but I got into it and learned many things that I didn't know before until I had actually finished researching the book. When you write about something you know too well, it has kind of a plodding, dutiful quality to it, that you're just trying to lay out everything that you think these youngsters should know about. But if you're writing about something that's still exciting to you because you're still curious about it and you're still finding out about it, I think that's what makes the best kind of a book.
The first poet that I fell in love with was William Carlos Williams, because he was writing in what he called the American idiom, that is our colloquial American speech. And that was like, oh yes, because before that it was that time of year thou mayest in me behold, which I love. That's Keats, right? But no, that's Shakespeare. Take me back to my oral exams, I would fail Shakespeare. That time of year thou mayest in me behold, that's one of the sonnets. But that's British prosody, and we're not that. We're speaking American English. Williams brought me there. And then Paul Eluard, when I was in college, a boy who was trying to date me gave me this book of love poems by Eluard. And I'm standing there in the doorway reading these poems and hearing them in English. So, I fell in love with the book of love poems. And I did later translate them, Last Love Poems of Paul Eluard. I fell in love with the language, and the voice is accessible. He was writing during the World War II. He had an underground press, and his poems were leafleted over occupied France. So they had to be ones that people could understand.
Seeing yourself in a book, seeing your story being told through a book is so liberatory, revelatory, affirming. It's an act of radical humanity. I look at my book that way, like, yeah, let's tell our story from the voices of the very people who gave that story. Seeing yourself is not so much just limited to a body, right? So yes, I want to see and read about Black people in books. I want to read about Black people in specific places and periods of time. It's also characteristic. You know, I'm a awkward Black girl in many ways. I want to read about like awkwardness and shy characters and weirdos and, you know, the people that I want to be in life. So I think the range of fantasy, abstraction, but also reality, that dualism that books give you is just awesome.
I mentioned Hemingway's Movable Feast because he goes through Paris eating. So that got me interested, you know, because me and food, right? I'm a Jewish mother, what can I say? And Rimbaud's poetry takes us into places in Paris, and I go to those places too. But I knew them first through the books.
So I've read these other books where I just really enjoyed the setting, and they might be like medieval fantasies like Lord of the Rings and so on, and I wanted to go to England because of that, and in fact did so. Went to England and visited these castles and just was really struck by that. And so that was sort of the motivation for choosing to write about my own home region, is I wanted to do the same thing for this area.
What's the value of writing about what you know? That's an old truism that we talk about, right? And it's good to write about, you know, what your body knows and what the places that you've been, but the imagination can go so much farther. So writing about the places that you like to know, the places you yearn to know, and reading about that's priceless. You know, and getting to know those places imaginatively. I mean, what would we do without Tolkien, for example? You can't buy a ticket for that, but you know, those places, those languages, he didn't write about what he knew. He wrote about what he'd like to know.
Well, I have found that it's incredibly useful and inspiring for young people to be able to read about their own home region and about people that they might not be exactly like them, but they're close enough to them that they can relate to them. But kids are bombarded by all sorts of things from all sorts of places and all sorts of cultures and different types of media. And in order to get them interested in the book, it's often very useful for them to be able to read about their own world, to read about the mountains or the city they live in or the region they live in, to hear people speaking in the same accent they have. And it just makes the books much more readable for people, especially young people who are struggling to read books for pleasure for the first time. So these reluctant and resistant readers. If you give them a book that they can relate to, that they can imagine in their mind, and in my case, they can actually visit the places that I write about. And it just clinches the story in their mind, because as they're reading the story, they can visualize it much more.
I had to give a report on Marcel Proust on the first volume of his 8-volume series, which is À la recherche du temps perdu, or In Search of Lost Time. The first volume is Swan's Way, and that book never left me. It was a combination of poetry and the novel. There was a story, but the language itself was gorgeous, and it took you into the question of what is memory? What kinds of memories do we have? There's the memory of like what your street address is, but there's the memory of yourself standing on a piece of sidewalk when you were a little boy or a little girl, and you can feel the flavor of that time. You have a sense of yourself. It's an affective memory, an emotional memory, and it helps you realize that time is a continuum.
You matter a whole lot, and whoever you are, right? So, and you're worth finding out who you are and where you came from, and that is the value of reading, right? And the value of literature, history, learning not only who you are as a person right now, but as along a continuum of history, right? How did you get here? Where'd you come from? What did it take for you to be able to get here? Because I'm sure that your ancestors dreamt of you when they were going through whatever they were going through to make their world a little bit better. Books and having a connection to reading and seeing yourself in literature and in nonfiction is important for that very reason, because it gives you a sense of mutual recognition that you matter, that you are and were here, right? You've already been here.
Authors across generations have drawn from their hometown experiences to create great literature. It's the sense of community and a profound sense of place that ground any story. I'm Meredith Vieira. Thanks for watching.
Authors and Their Hometowns, the companion documentary to The Great American Read, was made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a grant from Anne Ray Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.